Hi everybody and welcome to my presentation. Today we're going to be talking about the global commodity chain, specifically in the fashion industry. Okay, so let's take a look at these definitions here. A commodity is an article of trade that is bought and sold because it's useful to people. A commodity chain is an organized process that firms use to transform resources into products and then distribute them to consumers. So basically what a commodity is going to be is something that you buy, whether that be a product or a resource. A commodity chain is going to be basically proving that you need this thing, advertising it, getting it to you, how it's created, and how it gets to you. Today's commodity chain that we're going to be taking a look at is fashion. So I'm by no means a fashionista. I had to go take a look in my closet to see what brands I had. And when I was looking around, these are like the top ones that I found. We're going to have Old Navy, Flying Monkey, Roxy, Shein, and 90 Degree by Reflex. I did some major research on these companies and brands and found a lot of interesting stuff. There's a lot of facts here that you're going to see. But take note that while most of them are headquartered here in the US, almost none of them actually make their clothes here in the US. This didn't necessarily surprise me. I feel like as an American, it's pretty commonly known that, a lot of things come from China or other countries. But I did find it interesting that a lot of them have really low ratings on the Fashion Transparency Index, which means that they're not really telling all of their business happenings. But was it always like this? Did we always make clothes in China? I also did some more research into what's considered vintage clothing. Specifically, I looked at popular brands from the 1970s here in the US. And these are some tags and labels that I found. Go ahead and take a look at those and we'll talk about them on the next slide. So, whoa. When you take a look at these companies, you're going to see that the majority of them actually not only were headquartered in the US, but also made their clothes in the US. There is one brand that was headquartered and imported from Italy that I found, but these were very hard to come by and were considered more high end and higher priced. So what does this mean? Well, I have some direct comparisons here, kind of going over how a lot more brands are imported now than what they used to be here in the US, and just as little as 50 years ago. Something to really take note of here, though, is while we did have some clothing items being imported from other countries, they were rare and harder to find and more expensive and more high-end. This was more of a luxury item. Versus now, when we are importing clothes all the time, we do this to save money, and it's a cheaper item of clothing and faster to get here. It's so common. So let's talk about this importing from other countries now because it's so common. There's two theses that we're going to cover here. The first one I want to talk about is the race to the bottom thesis. So a lot of times when we are importing from these other countries, it's to save our American businesses money. In these other countries, you don't have to pay people as much. There's not as many benefits that you have to give your employees. The conditions of the factory don't have to be quite as high. And so what this is doing is saving money for the company while also getting tons of new employees. The second thesis that we're going to talk about is the sourcing efficiencies thesis. So for this one, these big corporations that are importing clothing items, they get a lot of flack because it's like we're using and abusing terms like modern day slavery are used. And this is kind of the comeback for those. They're saying, well, us spending less money to create these clothes is better for us. Not only is my company profiting more and pushing that into our economy, but our items are able to maintain a certain price range so they're more available to you. And we're able to push more items out into the world. And on top of that, we're not technically breaking rules because we're following the rules that these countries have set for their own people. So while these are low wages and poor standards for us, for those guys, this is kind of just average. And like I'm not talking about whether I agree with one or the other on this slide. We're going to take a look at that on the next slide. Okay, so my favorite brand out of all the clothing that I have is Old Navy. They're cheap, so it's affordable for me. My body changes a lot. I have to continuously buy new clothes. Um, so it's what I like. And as far as ethics and Old Navy goes, it could be better, it could be worse. We know that they use countries that don't have worker protection and don't have high wage standards or benefits or factory standards. And while Old Navy has not necessarily released what's going on in their factories in these other countries, I think it's probably safe to assume that the reason they have the factories here is so that they don't have to provide the additional pay, benefits, and safety that they would here in the US. It's a way to save them money and time. And as a consumer of this product, I recognize how my business contributes to this problem. However, I don't necessarily think that the responsibility of what's going on in other countries falls onto the consumers. While we do contribute, I feel like it really falls on the corporate owners and high up business people of the US. They're the ones that are in charge, that are doing these things, and yeah, they make profits. I don't know that it's necessarily right or wrong. It's kind of a gray area because they're not breaking the laws in these other countries. But I do think we are taking advantage of these other countries and their people and resources by putting our factories over there. So I hope to see a change one day, but I think it's going to need to be changed from the top of the chain instead of the bottom of the chain.